Hi, I'm Anne. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be reviewing a book by Wilkie Collins called The Haunted Hotel. The only book I have ever read by Wilkie Collins is The Woman in White, and I absolutely adored it. I read it in high school. I've been meaning to read more of his books since, and I think a year or two ago I bought a couple copies of his books. I bought The Moonstone in a 2-set series, and I bought this one, which is The Haunted Hotel. But this one, I had many thoughts on. When it comes to classic authors, there are certain authors where every single work, it seems, that they wrote was an absolute masterpiece. Take Jane Austen. Maybe people might critique that all of hers aren't a masterpiece, but all of hers definitely became endearing classics. You even have some of her unfinished novels like Sanditon coming back and having a resurgence because so many people just love her work. And her five or six? Her main novels are all considered to be masterpieces. You also have the Bronte sisters, who only wrote, 1 to 2 novels each, and yet those books are all considered to be masterpieces. However, a lot of classic authors, there are a couple of their books, maybe a handful, which are considered to be masterpieces, considered to be true classics. But what a lot of people in the modern day don't realize, that a lot of those authors were probably very prolific during their time, but there were only just a handful of their books that were so good that they became classics. And one example of this is Wilkie Collins. Wilkie Collins wrote dozens and dozens of novels, and you've only heard probably of a handful of his books, whether it is The Moonstone, The Woman in White. Those are the two I would say that I predominantly think of when I hear his name, but he wrote a lot of more books. Not all classic authors had masterpieces all the time. Honestly, like, a lot of their books were probably okay, maybe even good, but they weren't the masterpieces that stood the test of time. And that is what I feel like when I read this book, The Haunted Hotel. So let's get to the premise. So the book starts off, you got this doctor whose name I can't even remember because he's a pointless character and he will never come back. Oh yeah, Dr. Wybrow. A bit of a misogynist. He basically hears that a young woman is here to see him and wants his advice. I have to read you actually the section that he talks about. His knowledge of women rested on ripe experience of more than 30 years. He had met with them in all their varieties, especially the variety which knows nothing of the value of time and never hesitates at sheltering itself behind the privileges of its sex. And while on the surface you might say, yeah, there are definitely women that are like that, but like just the description of how he describes it, this doctor is not that great. So this young woman comes to him and she's like, basically, I'm doomed. She is marrying this young man, Baron Montbarry, and he was engaged previously to this young woman named Agnes. He rather met the Countess, fell in love with her, and broke it off with Agnes, breaking her heart. And the Countess says to the doctor, I am a horrible person because I, in a sense, broke them up because he fell in love with me. She said she just ran into Agnes and she realized just how wonderful Agnes was as a person and how Agnes didn't bear ill feelings for the Countess for, in a sense, stealing her fiancé. Some ominous things are said, and that is like the initial first chapter. We get all this information, and I'm like, okay, so it's going to be a mystery on like kind of what's going on with the Countess. Will something terrible happen to the Countess? Because she's like the next time Agnes and I meet, it will be the last time. And so it's very ominous, very ominous. And so then I'm like, okay, so we're going to follow this doctor kind of investigating what's going on. And the doctor is in 2 chapters. So he is in the first chapter, obviously, when she visits him. Then he goes to attend the wedding. And I believe the beginning of the story is set in 1859 or 1860, even though the book was published in 1879. But most of this takes place in the early 1860s. And so the doctor attends the wedding, and then he's out. We never hear from him again. I don't really understand what the point was of introducing his character, just to not have him in for the rest of the book. But yeah, so then we kind of follow Agnes as well as Baron Montbury's brother, Henry, who is in love with Agnes, but she is in love with his older brother, who is marrying the Countess. There's a lot of drama are going on. So the beginning of the book starts off very slow. I did not enjoy the beginning of the book. It was a slog to get through. But as I will confess, by the end of the book, it does set up things well for the conclusion of the book. And the second half, I would say, of the book is exceptional. So I'm going between 3 or 4 stars for the book. I'm leaning towards 4 stars because despite its weaknesses, which I'll get to in a minute, it is a very interesting book. So about, I would say, halfway through the book, or a little bit less than halfway through the book, Baron Montbury dies. And he dies of flu symptoms, so his family believes that the Countess had something to do with his death, as well as her brother, who was staying in Venice. Most of this takes place either in Venice or in England. At the time when Montbury dies, basically, she and her brother, the Countess and her brother, are the only people closely related to the situation. There is also this courier that goes to take a message to Venice to the Countess and her husband, and he vanishes. And his name is Ferrari. Ferrari, yes, like the car. I don't think Ferraris were invented at the time. In fact, I know they weren't. So it wasn't named after the car. But Mrs. Ferrari is super distraught and upset that her husband's just vanished without no warning, especially when the Countess, in the name of her husband, sends Mrs. Ferrari a check saying, "Oh, I'm sorry that he went missing. We don't know where he is. Here's a courtesy check." Seems very suspicious. And Mrs. Ferrari is also a close friend of Agnes. Agnes comes back into the story. When authorities go to investigate his death, nothing is found weird. Like, there's evidence that he got sick, evidence that doctors were called in to try to help him, evidence that the Countess stayed by his side when he was dying. So there's no evidence that foul play or he was being poisoned or something like that. Basically, his family, they suspect the Countess, but they can't prove anything. So flash forward a year. The palace in which the Baron Montbury died has been transformed into this hotel. Thus, why the book is called The Haunted Hotel. And his room, the Count Montbury's room where he lived and died, it has been turned into number 14 room. And everyone who stays there has some strange experience. We don't know quite why. If it's a ghost, if something's going on, it's definitely hinted at that it is a ghost, but as you'll see in the end, it's not really explained what it is. But the Countess is racked with guilt at the reality of the situation, and so she confesses at the end. I won't give incredibly detailed spoilers. I will have an end spoiler if you want to know every spoiler at the end of the book. There's no firm protagonist. There's no person that you're following along with and really enjoying their character. You do have Agnes, who is Baron Montbury's previous fiance. She is the competition of the Countess. The Countess seems to have a lot of issues with her, but Agnes herself is kind of perfect. Don't get me wrong, I don't need a highly flawed individual to follow and really enjoy their character. I can have a pretty moral individual. Yeah, maybe they make mistakes, but they are overall a good person. However, with Agnes, she is perfect. So there is nothing to really grasp on to her character to really enjoy. She's very much, I would compare her to Jane Bennet from Pride and Prejudice, where she's just very sweet and nice and kind and gentle, and that is her entire character. Rather boring. And then you have, I would say, the other main character that I wouldn't, again, call any of these people the protagonist. In fact, if anyone I would call the protagonist, it would be the Countess herself. But the second main character is Henry Westwick, the younger brother of Baron Montbury, as well as he has been in love with Agnes. So It is him, as well as he has two brothers, Arthur, and I can't remember the other name. There's a whole bunch of brothers and a lot of family, and I could not keep track of everyone, especially for this book being only 250 pages. There were a lot of characters that were very similar in personality. But so those are the two main characters on the good side, and then you have the Countess. She is not a lot in the story. We hear about her through different characters, different relationships she has with characters, but we don't overtly learn about her as a person, except for in random pieces. In fact, the only time she actually enters the book, even though she is very predominant throughout the book being talked about, is at the beginning and at the end. She is not really in the center of the novel at all. We just hear about her after her husband died in Venice. She goes off to America, and then she returns a year later. And so the family's trying to still figure out if Montbury was murdered. The thing I really did like about this book is this ominous feel to it. And one of the big themes in this book is intuition, especially women's intuition, I have noticed. Whether it's the Countess or Agnes, they just have feelings about things, and usually those feelings come true. So it's an interesting theme that is explored, that don't always dismiss a woman just because she's working maybe more on intuition than on factual data, because there is a way to prove that factual data by taking account intuition, which is this quote is actually from the book. That's why I put this quote up. It's kind of a perfect emphasis of the theme of the book, which is the idea of feelings and sensations being important for bringing out the truth of a situation. So I really enjoyed some of the themes, the questioning you have throughout the book of exactly what is going on. And I definitely would not have thought of that solution, because the two main mysteries, I would say, are what happened to the courier Ferrari and was the Baron Montbury murdered? So those are the two questions. Now, let me get into spoilers, complete spoilers. And this is a very unique way to reveal the crime, and I've never seen this done in a mystery novel before, but I really enjoyed it, where the Countess decides to write a play, and she gives it to Henry Westwick, the brother of Baron Montbury. She tells him it's fiction, but it is clearly at least partially based on reality. And she reveals that her brother was very deep in debt. He would constantly spend money. So he decided that he wanted her to marry a wealthy man. So he noticed that the Baron Montbury had fallen in love with her upon first sight. So he decided to use that. So she married him. So the Countess, in a sense, is a very tragic character. What happens next is they go to Venice, and they decide that they have to get the Baron out of the way. He is disliking her brother. He's starting to not trust the Countess. She's acting suspicious, but they know that if they just randomly kill him, they will be suspected. So when the courier Ferrari comes there, he is sick with the flu, and they see that he is going to die in a few days. There's nothing the doctors can do. So what they decide to do is switch him for the Baron. Lock up the Baron. No one will ever know where he is. And instead call all these doctors, pretend that Ferrari is in fact the Baron Montbury. So when he dies, everyone is like, oh, Baron Montbury died, obviously. And while the real Baron Montbury is locked away, starving and dying. So Baron Montbury was clearly murdered, and Ferrari just died of natural causes, and the Countess and her brother used it to their own ends, his death. Very interesting solution. I was not expecting it. In the end, we don't actually learn if the play is the complete truth, because the Countess dies. She has a heart attack before she can actually reveal if the play is true or if it is partially fiction. So it is a very partially unsatisfactory conclusion. However, it is slightly happy because Agnes, for some reason, decides to marry Henry Westwick, which is fine because Henry Westwick was, for me, like the only semi-interesting character in the entire book. The Countess is a fascinating character too, but she's not exactly the character that you could root for. But by the end of the book, I could understand her a lot better. But I've been talking on way too long. This is a very jumbled review, but I found this book very interesting and I enjoyed it, but I also think it could have been a lot better if it had had one main character, whether that is Henry Westwick or Agnes Katniss or even the Countess if we followed her more without revealing the truth of what was going on, instead of kind of being up in the air and kind of seeing everything without seeing that much. So being very selective in what we saw, but never getting inside a character's head. I would have enjoyed that a lot more. But the ambiance, the mystery is done very well by Wilkie Collins in both his books I've read by him, and I look forward to reading more books by him. I'm hoping to read The Moonstone later this month. If not, maybe I'll read it in October because, you know, it is kind of a perfect October read. But I'm curious if you've read more Wilkie Collins books. Have you noticed any strengths he has in his works, any weaknesses he has? If you would recommend any particular book you've read by him that you're like, this is his best work that I haven't read, I would love to know your thoughts down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, like, subscribe. I post every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye!